Welcome to Urgent Conversations. Our guest today is Marshall Terrill. Welcome, Marshall.
Thank you.
And before we get into, Colin's going to do a brief background, a brief bio that he has ready to talk about
Sure.
some of the things you've done. I just briefly want to touch on why I have you here and why it's such a special treat for me. So, I'm a voracious reader. I obviously on the research side, but also books that really capture my attention. And it's very interesting to me. 1993, I remember reading your Steve McQueen biography way back then. And that book resonated so much with me because it was so well researched, but it was also very balanced and very thorough. It wasn't one of those, to me, biographies where whether people are maybe, fawning over the person or maybe being overly nice or overly mean. It was just such a nice balance where I felt like I read it and I kind of had a picture of what was going on. I understood it. I've been, like, for
Mhm.
me, it's just such a treat. I mean, Marshall, I'm sorry, but I'll gush a little bit. I'll say thank you for being on here. Thank you, sir.
You're welcome.
Colin, thank you.
Yes,
Colin, do you want to do a brief intro for Marshall?
yes, sure, sure. Well, everyone, our guest today is Marshall Terrill. He is an incredibly prolific author and journalist who has written more than 30 biographies over the past 3 decades. He's best known for deep dives into the lives of icons like Steve McQueen, Elvis Presley, Johnny Cash, Billy Graham. You may have heard some of them, right? Stories that explore fame, struggle, redemption. Marshall's work blends the heart of a storyteller with the precision of a journalist, giving us a front row seat to the real lives behind the legends. And in today's discussion, we're going to look a little bit on the side of that and really dive deeper into Marshall's views on the world, life, who he is, and get to know the passion that drives him. Right? Welcome, Marshall.
Well,
Glad
thank
to
you
have
for
you
that
here
great
today.
intro.
Thank you, Colin. So Marcia, I'm going to ask you, and I know that a lot of interviews you do, and I've seen them. You obviously talk about the famous people that you and the process of going through it. But I'm really interested in your process, and I do kind of want to take us back to 1993 because I'm aware of, it took I think roughly 3.5 years, right, to do the research. It
Right.
was the first biography that you published, so it kind of gives me a theme of like resilience because people think that, oh, you've made it overnight. Because I mean, you look at how many books you've published, but I really want to talk about the process. Like, how did you persevere? What were your challenges? What were the difficulties that you were experiencing and you still kind of pushed through to your goal?
Well, at the time before the book, what got me into the book was I was working for a gentleman by the name of Charles Keating, very famous financier who worked for, sorry, who ran Lincoln Savings and Loan. He ran it out of Phoenix, but the savings and loan was in California. And so, anyways, long story short, federal government put him behind bars because of some violations, and then I was just getting ready to graduate college, and I was married at the time as well. And so when all that went down, I was without a job, and then my wife left me. So I was just kind of at a crossroads, like, what do I do now? Because I was banking on working for Charles Keating when I graduated just to make that smooth transition over. And so that didn't happen. And then, of course, I was emotionally devastated with my wife leaving. But I'd always had and have a great relationship with my parents. And so they lived in Washington, D.C. at the time, and I live in Arizona now, and at that time I was living in Arizona. So my dad called me and said, "Well, what is it that you really want to do?" I said, "You know what I've always wanted to do was write a book on Steve McQueen." And his words were, "I couldn't even get you to write a paper in high school. Why would you want to do something like that?" I said, "I don't know what it is, but it's something that I've always felt called to do." But he said, "You know what?" He goes, "You're young enough to where if you fail, you can still recover." And so that was like my beacon of light. Like that gave me the green light to go ahead and do that. So that's what happened. So I spent the next 3.5 years, that famous saying now, you're living in your parents' basement. Well, that's what I did. I lived in my parents' basement for 3.5 years while I wrote this book. But it turned out to be a good thing because on the side, I was selling and trading and making money off of Beatles memorabilia. And actually, I was doing
Smart.
quite well. I was able to pay off my college within a year, and I even had my own accountant.
Wow.
So I was doing that. I was making money, living in my parents' basement. And by the way, it was a very nice basement, and and so there was no rent. And but it did. There was some cost in doing the book. I estimate it cost me about 10 grand to fly and stay in Los Angeles over the course of 3 years. So I always say there's money. You have to spend money in order to write a book. You have to pay for an editor. You have to pay for a publicist. So those are costs that people don't really think about when they're going to be doing a book.
Yeah.
Because my advance at that time was $5,000. It was really, really small. But and that did, and that they split that up so you don't get it all at once. So anyway,
Uh,
um, so again, going back to what my dad said, you're young enough. So I was 24 at the time, 24, 25, because when the book was finished, I was 29. So um, anyway, so spent 3.5 years doing that. Now, something like that today would take me maybe a year, year and a half, because back then you transcribed your own tapes. Everything was very, very labor intensive. You know,
right.
a there's a
AI.
I have a transcription service called Temi. I mean, well, you transcribed your own tapes, and then if you made a little money, then you paid somebody to do it, but it was pretty expensive. But now you've got all this technology. Well, when I first started the book, I didn't even have internet. So all of my research, I call it gumshoeing. I went to the Library of Congress. I lived in Washington, D.C., where I could go to the Library of Congress, and I went to New York City, and I went to various libraries there. But nowadays, it's all on your fingertips. You can get it whatever you want, so you don't even have to go to those places.
So you're
So.
probably so excited about it now, like how much you can do now, right? In such
Oh
little time.
yeah.
Yeah,
Oh
yeah.
yeah. And and
Relatively
and
speaking.
and that's how I've been able to write 30 books. Sometimes I've got 3 books going on at one time, or they're in various stages, of course. One could be in editing, one could be just finishing up, and then the other one I might just be starting or something. And I try not to do that, but sometimes that's just how it plays because you have to take those opportunities when you can get them. And sometimes books, will take a little bit longer and they kind of linger until, you're finished. But so for example, I have this year, 2025, well, in December, my third book will be published this year. Now, those books have been kind of like lingering. Some of them have been lingering. And so, but anyway, it just so happens. It's just like a movie star who's got 3 movies out. Well,
Yeah.
it's because
Process,
one
yeah.
was filmed 2 or 3 years ago and couldn't find a proper release. One was filmed a year ago and is getting its release, and one was filmed quickly. So, anyway, that's a long, rambling way of just saying these were some of the things that I had experienced. But as far as what my process was, it did lay a good foundation for my process, and that was you get the research first. You find out who the people are that are important to them. You call them, you try to set up interviews. Um, and so then you start building a story that way. And of course, you have your previous books that have been written, and you try to find out what can I do that's different, what can I do that's unique. I don't ever really try to take an angle. What I try to do is I do the research, and then I see patterns, and then I don't ever try to push an agenda on people. I don't, you know, I'm old school in that way. I'm an old school journalist. As you stated, Martin, I let the reader decide. I don't try to
Yeah.
push any one view on person. I try to give the good and the bad, and I try not to be too judgmental. What I try to do is I try to allow other people who knew him to state opinions. And I'm just the narrator. I am just someone. If you're watching a movie or a documentary, I am simply just the narrator, and I take you from point A to point B, and then I let that person tell their story. That's the way I try to do it.
It's really what resonated with me. Like it really captured my attention. So I found it, I would say, unique in terms of I don't see, again, a lot of times maybe my view, but I see people having a little bit of an agenda, whether it's going to come out as a positive angle, negative, and that's exactly it. It's kind of let the reader decide. You gave us so many beautiful threads that I want to don't want to lose track of. One was, I go back to the track of resilience because people also think we're in such a time where it's so different now than it was, but kind of the beats that you hit, having to live, housing shortages, so living in your parents' basement, really pursuing your dream while you're doing a side hustle. So you're kind of seeing these things occur, when you see students. We're still seeing the same beats. Maybe some pressures have increased, but there's still kind of a resonance over time where it kind of repeats itself in a different way. I don't want to also lose the thread of because you talked about how much faster you can go in a way with the research. But do you think there's like, because then we get into AI and that other thing, gathering general data. But do you think there's a certain a benefit to having to been in the trenches to really dig for it? And I guess maybe talk to people more. So it took you longer, but maybe something that we're not very kind of get ahead, move fast forward, but something to be said for going through a longer process, even though obviously it's financially a bit of a hardship, I guess I would say, for if you're beginning.
Right. Yeah. Well, I think the first thing that comes out at me is the human contact. I did a documentary on a serial killer um, that from the 60s, and as producer of it, I was interviewing people in their 70s and 80s, and what I was finding, even though we were talking about a dark subject, they were looking forward to talking to me and meeting me in person and having that human contact. Whereas I see, I work with 20 somethings and 30 somethings. And what I'm seeing is that they necessarily don't want that human contact. Rather than talk on the phone, they just want to text. That there's a
Yeah.
layer there of um, you know, technology has put us in a place where there's just not that human contact anymore. And my daddy was even telling me, when he was growing up, you grew up in a community and you 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 helped each other survive. He had side hustles with all his friends and they all grew up together. My mom, my dad is no longer with us, but my mom is 85 and she was just telling me the other day she was meeting a person for breakfast who she went to kindergarten with. So there were these human connections that go all the way back. The way I see it with technology was we are losing that. We're losing that human contact.
Yeah.
So that does relate to the research that I did back then, and it's good. I'm sick. I'll be 62 in December, so I have a foot in one generation and a foot in another. So I did the old gumshoeing, and I'm thankful that I had that experience. I was once a driver, and I used to have to use a map to find
Mm.
places, and I
I
had to
remember that.
memorize the street numbers and the system. So I have that. But now I can just plug it in and I can find it. So the thing is that if you rely too much on that technology, then you never learn the basic grid or the layout. So
Right.
I'm very, very thankful that I have a foot in both worlds. But I will say with the technology world, I'm a step below. If I want my iPhone, if something going quirky with my iPhone, I go to a millennial or a 20 something and say, "Hey man, can you fix this for me?" And sure enough, they can do it in the
Yeah.
snap of a finger.
I bet you can't fix this.
I was just going to
Marshall, on the topic of patterns, as you mentioned that, as you've gone back many decades, right, and you've interviewed many people that have had either failures in their life and made rebounds again with resilience, right, and
Yes.
perseverance, right? When you look at the people then versus the people now, and I'll say people generally, right?
Hmm.
Are there any patterns that you've seen where, like for example, when Martin and I are in front of a classroom, for example, and we are in front of students, after like maybe the first session of interacting with those students, you can figure out who are going to be, who have the core to be successful, right? Or to do good in their career. For you, when you meet with people, right, do you pick up on patterns where you say, okay, these are really the foundational elements, human elements of a person that allow them to go bankrupt and then rebound, or to be successful if they persevere and stick to it? What are those patterns, human patterns or traits?
Are you talking specifically about resilience?
We could start with resilience and then move into perseverance. Yes. Yeah. Mhm.
Well, I see, first of all, I see resilience. related to health. For example, um, a lot of people that live through a lot, like my parents are the perfect example. They live through a lot of things. They live through a lot of change. When you're exposed, I think, to hardship at a very young age,
Hmm.
that can, the one thing is it can haunt you, but the flip side of that is if you survive it and you channel it into something positive, that can be really something dynamic. My dad lived through the Great Depression. Um, he uh, he was born in a copper mining town where everybody worked in the copper mines, but and he worked there for a year, and then he decided that he was going to jump into the military. But yeah, hard scrabble. Same with Steve McQueen. You know, hard scrabble, pull yourself up by the bootstraps. But if you put with my dad, he put himself through college, went to the Air Force, and then he was able to right the ship. So I feel like when you're exposed to those hardships as a young age, you can almost get through anything. Um, so that's how I kind of look at resilience. And then, of course, I always see that related to health too. He was a pretty healthy guy and then the pandemic hit, and then he got struck. He was 83. He had some underlying health issues, but he would have kept going, had that not happened. But part of that was he went to doctors, and he saw all his doctors, normally got regular checkups, saw them all, did all the right things that he was supposed to do.
Yeah,
And that's how I look at resilience. Maybe the answer just is with resilience, doing the right things.
yeah, and,
I
and
do want to
building up
pick
that survival routine. Yeah.
I do want to pick up the thread about your dad because I know you moved around a lot as well, so the changes in
Right.
environment. But I just want to say, Colin, to your point too, on
Mhm.
mine, I wouldn't quite say that you can always tell which student. Sometimes it's a support aspect, and sometimes some of the students develop on a different line and they're missing certain pieces just
Yeah.
to be able to speak more and so on. So just do want to make that point. But I definitely want. There's so many threads, Marshall, that I would love to pick up on, but. I did obviously doing a little bit of background research. I noted the fact that your dad moved around because of being on the Pentagon, right, in the Air Force.
Yep.
So, and I assume that probably would have affected you as well in terms of your drive.
Absolutely.
So I wonder if you could talk about that.
I can tell you exactly how it impacted me in two ways. First of all, you always entered a situation as an outsider. So you had to find a way to fit in. Sports was kind of the way for me to fit in. But the negative impact of that was educational systems throughout the states are completely different. So from one year we went to Alabama, which was absolutely the worst, to Northern Virginia near Washington, D.C., which was one of the top rated school districts. So that those adjustments were always tough to make. To me, my real education took place in community college, and then of course college, and then the hard fact of like, you're living like a college student, you're living with three or four people in a house, and it was like, do I want to keep living like this the rest of my life? You know, or do I want to graduate, get a home, do all these great things? The thing, by the way, I was just thinking about this yesterday. I was a first time homeowner by the age of 24.
It's
Wow.
amazing.
So,
Yeah, really.
um, again, it had nothing to do with my smarts. It was a matter of being connected to the right people and your drive and luck. Sometimes luck has a lot to do with it, I think.
I sit in a lot of I deal with a lot of housing issues, right? So obviously there's different things that people are going through now, but it's a huge challenge. I mean, I'm sure in the States to a great extent, but in Canada we're basically seeing prices go up so rapidly, right? And you really have to have now. It makes a difference, sure, your drive, what you're doing. There's a lot. It seems to be a lot of intergenerational connection sometimes to just to get through, right? Getting help from the generation before you, just to persevere with the house. So that's why I really do mean wow when you say 24. Like on our end here in Canada, it's a pretty difficult aspect.
Yep.
I'm going to pass it over to you for some questions, Colin. I just want to pick up one last question that I want to make sure I don't miss, because what I really wanted to get to is I also looked at when you did some of the books, right? Later on, you went from I'm assuming and you can correct me, your process when you were writing the Steve McQueen book might have been more in terms of you were the researcher, right? You're just connecting with some people to do the interviews with. But then I looked at, for instance, when I read about when you worked on the Pointer Sisters book, right?
Hmm.
And then it talks about aspects of collaboration where you really had a bond. Same thing with Barbara McQueen, right? In
Right.
terms of having the connection. So I guess can you talk about that too? How that happened? Maybe the differences in terms of kind of, for lack of a better term, grinding it out on your own, just working at it, and then having that maybe trust develop.
Yeah. Well, with the collaboration, I always say when somebody gives you an interview that in a way, if it's not like a political interview, where they're trying just to give you a quick line, if they're giving you an interview and they're telling you about their lives, they're really giving a piece of themselves to you. So as a journalist, you really have to respect that and protect it in a way. Um, and so what happens in the course of doing a book, the three ladies that I have actually done books with are the three strongest bonds that I have made in doing books with people. Um, and that was Ruth Pointer, the Pointer Sisters, who, I could text her right now and she would text me right back. Barbara McQueen, same thing. We talk, Barbara and I talk on a weekly, bi-weekly basis. And then Barbara Lee, um, who lives in Florida. I talk to maybe a couple times a year. But again, when you do that collaboration, they're telling you their life story that I think on their end, they're probably saying, this guy knows more about my life, and has helped me to understand and process. And I think that's probably where the bond is. And the bond on my side is you've taken a chance on me to tell your story, to tell it correctly. And then you just develop a friendship because long after the book is done, you don't really talk about elements that are in the book. You just talk about your everyday life and you just develop this regular friendship. Although,
Yeah.
like Barbara McQueen and I will talk about Steve every now and then, like, oh, I saw this the other day, or hey, did you read this about Steve? And we'll talk about that sort of thing. So that's the way I look at collaboration, and it's more fun because you're not doing it alone. And the other challenge is like you're hearing the voice and you want to make sure you got the pattern and the rhythm right, and then you send it to them and they like it, and then, or if something's wrong, then you make adjustments. So that's what the collaboration's like.
No, I think that says a lot because I think again that even drew me to, the book I keep going back to because again it made such an impact in '93 that that objectiveness. So I think what you're telling me that it does come across because people know that you're going to tell their story, you're going to tell the way it happened, or at least or the story of whoever they're connected to, but you're being fair about it. So you might get some, not perfect parts, but at least it's not a biased take, for lack of a better word. So
Right.
Colin, I'll jump over to you because I know you're waiting
Yeah.
with some additional questions for Marshall.
Yeah, no worries. I like the pace of this conversation. I think there's a lot there are many tangents we can go on, but I think as I was preparing for this conversation, Marshall, right, and reading through some of the work you've done, reading through some of the ways you approach things, you take your time. You're not afraid to go deep, right? And I think there's a lot of value in that. I appreciate now the approaches of a journalist, right? In today's world where you can access anything so easily, potentially it's important to go below the surface, right? So,
Yeah.
as you've met with folks, are there any, I guess, experiences you've had where you have learned from those discussions and you've found yourself almost adopting some of those traits? You know, like when you go undercover and you go too deep undercover, you become a different person. I
Hmm.
mean, if you reflect back, can you see yourself change as you meet different people and maybe
I
adopt some
wouldn't
of those
say I
traits?
change. What I would do is adopt the life lessons that they tell me about.
Yeah,
The common theme that in dealing with fame, uh, and I hate breaking it down to money, but what I see
yeah,
in a lot of people that are famous is that they always think that it's going to stay, and they don't. And a lot of times they end up losing their fortunes, and that's an easy thing to do. And so that's the one big lesson that I have learned. Like for
yeah.
example, even though I'm a writer, I have a full-time gig with Arizona State University as a reporter. And it's important for me to have a steady job. It's important for me to have a pension. It's important for me to have a 401k. It's important for me to have a savings plan. It's important for me to know when I should retire or if I'm going to have a job after I retire. So those are the main things, believe it or not, that I get from my conversations with these people because these are artists who, who hit it big. And then again, like Steve McQueen even lost his fortune. The Beatles lost their fortune. They lost their whole songwriting catalog at the end of uh, the time that they were together, and then they had to be smart about it and build it back up. So again, so that's that it's strange that that's my main takeaway, but there are other things that I've learned from them as well, so
Yeah, yeah,
but that's my one big takeaway.
yeah.
I think that
Is there
that's
any? Oh,
so
sorry.
I
Go
was just
ahead,
going to say,
Marshall.
I'll jump right back to you. 'Cause I was just going to say, I think because what I'm getting out of it too, that I think is worthwhile sharing people, I think there's that balance. So you're chasing your passion, you're making sacrifices at times, but you kind of want to keep in the back of your head. Because I very much agree with you. Same thing too. You don't want to get overwhelmed with that. You want to still have a little bit of a backup, that stability that will help you drive the
Right.
projects. Because if you disconnect with that stability, well, you might run out of funds, you might run out of different things. So movie stars, sure, maybe they won't get the next movie. If we're talking about writers, then maybe if it slows down on whatever the market is or something like that, you want that steady backup so one drives the other. So
Yep.
I just wanted to mention that, and if Marsha agrees with me
Thank you.
or so on,
I
and then
totally
pass it
agree
back
with
to
you. And in a way, it motivates me because, like, with the cycle of academia, you have the start of semester and then you have a break and then you have let's say from November to Christmas to New Year's, a little bit of a slowdown. So those are the times when I'm doing either heavy writing or heavy editing, and there's just this nice flow. There's this it's kind of a roller coaster effect. What you know exactly where you should be, you know exactly what you should be doing. I find myself more productive if I've got a full-time job. Whereas if I'm just a freelance writer and I'm just trying to scurry up gigs,
Mhm.
I couldn't be somebody who works in the gig economy. Um,
No.
and if you follow Hollywood right now,
Yeah.
you're seeing that Hollywood is really the production is starting to really sink. A lot of productions are going to other countries, and I belong to a website on Facebook called Cruise Stories, and I just saw a post of a gentleman who did the sound for a very famous movie. He got an Academy Award after that, and that was in 2014. Afterwards, he got all sorts of offers, and the meme said now he hasn't had a gig, in like the last year and a half,
Mm.
just because of the way that Hollywood is going.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so um, I just, I pay attention to those things, you
Yeah.
know. It's important for me just because I write about people losing their fortune all the time. So I guess that's why it resonates with me so much.
No, I
Yeah.
think that's a key point. Colin?
You're gonna see a lot more stories similar to that for sure coming up, right? And it's about who do you have around you, right? Your own community, your village to support you, right? To help you bounce back and stay with you when you're at the valley of life, right? So definitely that's important.
Yeah,
So
and I live in Arizona where I'm surrounded by my family, my
yeah,
mom, my
yeah.
sister, my brother, my wife, her family, the friends that, the friendships that I've lived here since 1982. So
Mhm.
it's fun. When I started out as a journalist, I bumped into another journalist who is now a very well-paid consultant. And it's just kind of fun and interesting to see the people that you start with, go and do other wonderful things. So
Yeah, yeah.
but the funny thing about journalism's gone the same way. I mean, when I was writing in the newsroom, there were maybe 100 reporters. Now that newspaper is totally gone, and a lot of the journalists that were my bosses were out of a job for many years, and then they had to reinvent themselves. You know.
Yeah.
And speaking of which, and mixing that with academia, I work for a great university president named Michael Crow, and he once said, this younger generation, they're going to have 10 different jobs or 10 different careers in their lifetime.
Yeah, I'm
Yeah.
seeing that.
So these are the new realities. I'm at that age where I'm on the tail end of my career, so I don't have to worry about that. But it's just interesting to see just in the cycle of 40 years where things are going.
With the
And,
journalism too, sorry, Marshall, because what I really, and again, I just want to get your take on it because obviously you're right in there. I find I'm not saying you, but I'm saying in terms of the number of journalists, like from my kind of looking in at it from a general viewpoint, I find that the news cycle is so fast that there's such a pressure, right, in terms of your. It almost seems like sometimes this news story isn't verified. Like with younger reporters, they're just going, and then they might do a retraction, but the pressure is I've got to cover Facebook. I've got to cover, whatever, every other little part of it. So I don't have the time to go make another call and verify it. I just got to keep up or I'm going to get left behind. So I just wanted to get your take on that as well, if you're
Yeah, well, I see that with I'm still friendly with some reporters at a very large newspaper, and as I started my writing at Arizona State University, I was finding out from that when I was with the newspaper, I might have to turn in a story every other day, and then a big feature to run on the weekend. So maybe I was writing three, four stories a week. But what I found out was they had to turn in 3 to 4 stories a day. Now, those stories were shorter.
wow.
They were like, a regular story might be around 300, 400 words, but they had to turn in 350 word stories a day, and that is a lot of pressure. And
Yeah.
you're right, because when you're pressured to write something that fast, you're apt to make more mistakes because you're not able to really think and process and put in key elements of the story. So there's that pressure. And I think that's unrealistic.
Yeah.
The idea that human beings can only consume a 150 word article kind of irks me. But I'm from the old school where I like a good story. I don't mind reading a nice piece, but it is what it is.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no, we're definitely programmed to get the short sound bites. So also, I very much appreciate you giving me a very thorough answers. It's a pleasure to kind of sit down, and I think it's part of our podcast where hopefully we don't try to rush people and kind of get the broad view and get your full answer. And as opposed to we're going to chop it up immediately into a short clip, and here you go, right? On to the next thing.
Yeah.
But
You know,
Colin, go ahead, because
one of the things that we touched on in the beginning was the idea of like first principles, right? Like especially if you look at journalism, right? So there's a process, which is what we led with. There's a process of getting to the answer, right? Getting the information and going below the surface. Now we have tools that can give us some of the surface level, but now you have the human relationships to help you really find out what matters, right? So, are there certain, like, I'll say cheat codes or first principle type lessons that you think have served you well as you build relationships and chase the true answer to a question?
Hmm. Um, Let me think. Well, I always try to approach things honestly. I guess if you establish yourself as an honest person in journalism, which is everything, by the way, um, the answers that you're seeking and the will become easier because the people who hold that information can trust you and they can trust you to tell the story effectively and correctly. So establishing that reputation as a journalist is really, really important. So as I was successful as a journalist because I was covering a city council with seven different members, and they all had 7 different viewpoints. As long as I gave everybody's viewpoint, I was good, and so nobody could accuse me of favoritism. Um, the funny thing was, though, was like these council members would call me and they'd rat each other out, and then you'd have to
yeah.
find out what the story was, but then you'd have to give the other person, the chance to reply. So as long as you were fair and you established yourself as fair, then it was fairly easy to get those answers, and people would call you up. Quickly to help you meet your deadlines. So as long as you establish that reputation, then that would to me that was the key.
I
Yeah.
think that's the challenge now too, in terms of you can say for journalists, but I think in all the processes that rapid thing we talked about, where get the info out now before, not even just before verifying, getting their side of the story and so on. Because I also find it resonates so much to me when I do outreach work, when I talk to students and seniors. So let's say if I go into a seniors home and I'm working on a new social isolation project, I find, if you just show up once, they've seen that before. People are popping in, maybe they want to grab some quick research data. So you get kind of, second time I show up the next week, they go, hey, how are you? Third week, they're like, okay, they're actually genuinely here. They're going to get the full story. So I think it's funny because to me, it resonates back to why that first book, again, I kind of keep coming back to me, just resonates so much with me, like that balance, that consistency. And for me, right, and I think you'd want to send a message to people just to kind of take, if you can, slow down just a tiny bit, do the verification, do the human connection, that type of thing, as much as you can with all the pressures we're facing. So
Yeah,
yeah,
and I feel sorry for the younger generation because I'm not sure if they're taught that. Technology has I feel like short-circuited the brain in that
yeah,
you want the quick and easy fix or you want the quick and easy answer. And if you're even waiting in line, I walk on college campuses now, and I see people buried, the students' head buried in the iPhone, even in crosswalks, even if they're
yeah.
riding a bicycle and in a crosswalk. You
Yes,
know, it's like
definitely.
there's no room to be bored. If you're standing in line at the post office, it just, when I walk my dog, same thing. I want to look and I might listen to a book on tape, but I see people just looking down at their iPhones to the point where they're almost going to bump into me and I have to say, excuse me. And then they go, oh.
Yeah.
But I just feel like that the technology is great, but it has its time and place. And my God, don't let it pose a danger. Like, for example, the people that show up in Yellowstone Park and they want to take a selfie with a bear,
Yeah.
when this thing didn't exist, people had the smarts to know, you know what, I shouldn't get close to a bear. But now that they've got this iPhone in their hand, all that inhibition goes out the window. So I feel like common sense isn't being taught anymore.
Well, it's the if it's the deal of if it doesn't have a picture or a photo, it doesn't exist, right? And sometimes I feel too like when you go to events, like I'm sure you've gotten to that too, where you kind of I try to if I do an event, I try to take pictures at the beginning, at the end, because I find you do such a disconnect too, because you're like, I'm talking to you, but let me grab a quick picture first. Oh, and look, there's something else going on this side. Let me grab a picture. And then the conversation gets very short too and very disjointed because it's almost like a cat following a shiny object. You're just darting back and forth. So that really resonates with me as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hey, Marshall, I'm dying to ask you this question. So you have met with people who have been classified as icons, right? So when you look around today in the world we're in today, who do you see as the icons that you think younger people should be trying to get to know or trying to learn life lessons from?
You know who I really like is Denzel Washington.
Yeah, yeah,
You ever hear him talk, he's talking about things of importance, and he doesn't put up with any nonsense.
right.
And there's some people where you listen to him, younger people would talk back. When he talks, people really, really take in what he's saying.
Yeah,
So he's one, and I love his acting, first and
yeah.
foremost. But he's one that, but the other thing too is I don't look for entertainers to give good advice. I really don't. I mean, they're great entertainers, but most entertainers are very, very flawed.
Yeah.
But but
I
Denzel
get
comes from a place of wisdom.
I get the impression the characters he plays and who he is in real life are not too
Yeah,
far apart, right?
right. Yeah,
Is that right?
they're old
Yeah.
school people. Like the Equalizer is the perfect thing. You can tell he was instilled with a lot of those old school ideas. And
Yeah.
the interesting thing is I see a lot of young people, and they are drawn to those type of characters, and yet. Um, there's still a disconnect. They love, young people love the Beatles. They love these old icons, and yet there is no attempt to either emulate that or they appreciate it, but there's no attempt to go in that direction.
Hmm.
I think it resonates too, like for me, and I'll get you take on it too, Martian, on university or college. We also have that thing where university and college, right? I won't over explain it, but college in the States, meaning university in Canada, but so I'm kind of lumping them all, college, university.
Yeah.
So what I find is that if you talk to people, a few decades back, there was always an aspect of, hey, here's my opinion, but get a second opinion, do some of your own research. Because when you talked about whether it's Denzel or other, generally entertainment, people seem to grab the first really resonating idea, I find, and then they're not getting the second opinion. They're like, this sounds great. Let's just all go do it. Where I feel like, and we're in a good position, I think, in university, college, where we can say, hey, wait a minute, you know, just make sure you use your reasoning. Go talk to this person who maybe has an opposing view or a different view and see how they connect or they don't mesh, and then do your own kind of general conclusion.
Right. My wife just got her job back with her older company, and she's in her 50s now, and she's training with a bunch of 20 somethings. And she said, what's interesting is that these 20 somethings, they seem to know everything. They're highly opinionated. They don't really want to listen to anybody. They think they know everything. But she found it more amusing. And I just said, well, that's just the thing. I said, that's the thing what people do in their 20s. I said, I probably did that. We all did that. And I said, as they get older, they become, more exposed to worldliness. And I think hopefully it's a maturing process. But yes, but
Get to
hopefully
travel
yeah, and yeah, travel's a
and
great
meet
thing.
people. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, that and think also brain development, right? So, I mean, there's different studies, but till maybe you're 20, I mean, we get different perceptions, but supposedly till at least you're 23, you're still developing as well. So
Yeah.
you need that time. So yeah, I don't think it's fair because I do a lot of intergenerational stuff. We kind of have to have that. Well, let me kind of not have the same judgment because you haven't had those extra 20 years of doing whatever. So I think that's a really key point. So I
Yeah.
appreciate
Yeah.
that.
Oh yeah. I mean, there are things that come out of my mouth today of stances that I would have been, in my 20s, I was just staunch about. And now it's like I have a live and let live attitude, like,
Mhm.
hey, anything over the age of 18, no problem, do what you want, but don't force it. Don't force anything on children. Whatever you want to do after the age of 18 is up to you, and then those are your decisions, and you have to live with the consequences.
Yeah. And then I mean we I think we get different karma. It's the way people interact with us. I think really if you have those good interactions and you're letting people be in a good way and you're not interfering with them, it'll come back to you tenfold usually. So I think that kind of evens out that way. So yeah, but that's really good.
Yeah.
So what advice would you give to this younger generation if you had to give them like a version of the Ten Commandments, right? That lay down the laws of being a good human and living a good life. What are those lessons that you would have learned along the way?
See, I hate giving advice to anybody. I
That's a good
really
answer
do.
already. Yeah.
Good answer, I know, right?
Because what happens is then people start judging you for what's coming out of your mouth, and
Yeah.
even though my objective would be pure, I don't want anybody to judge me from where I'm coming from. But I guess the best advice would be to be objective. Not everything is black and white. There are shades of gray to everything. And if but chase your passion, but also curb that with reality. So, for example, you know, I've met a lot of people that have gone to Hollywood and they're chasing their dream, but it hasn't happened for them in 30 years. And you want to say, at some point in time, you're going to have a retirement. At some point in time, you're going to have health insurance. At some point in time, you're going to have a roof over your head rather than couch surfing. Um, and what my dad taught me was just basically common sense. So it's he told me to chase my dream, but if I failed, I still had enough time to recover. And so, but some people don't know when to. You never want to tell anybody don't chase your dream, but on the other hand, you want to say might be time for you to get a job. If this acting thing doesn't work out for you.
To have the
Um,
balance, the savings have
yeah,
one go hand in hand
yeah.
with the other. So I think, yeah, I think that's a really key point. I'm very cognizant of Marshall's time, so I'll call in if
Hey
you have another
guys,
question.
your time is my time. It doesn't
Oh,
matter.
Sure. I also didn't
Mhm.
want to because I know you're like I really did want to talk about your process and so on, but also I don't mind doing a small plug for work you have coming out because I know, for instance, Jay Sebring, that book, it
Yes.
caught my interest. So if you want to maybe mention a little bit
Okay.
about that, I don't mind it.
Sure.
It'll be interesting to me, and let's
Sure.
plug it a little bit.
Well, how about we'll talk about the three books that came out this year. So
Perfect.
I did a book with the widow of a serial killer. His name was Charles Schmid. The book's called Schmitty, My Marriage to the Pied Piper of Tucson. That was his nickname. So he Charles Schmid committed these atrocious crimes in the mid 60s in Tucson, and his wife went into hiding for about 60 years. And then
Wow.
before the book came out, we were working on a documentary, and then finally she kind of emerged and says, "I want to tell my story." And as we interviewed her, I said, "You know what? This is a good book because, we read a lot about serial killers, but we don't really read about how this impacts the spouse, how this, we hear somewhat how it impacts the family of the victims. But to me, this would be curious to find out A, either how he tricked you, B, how you felt about him then, how you feel about him now, and and not only that, but in this particular case, nobody knew who ended up killing him. So, and I through our research, we end up finding out the two people who actually did kill him, but the people that perhaps might have hired him to do it.
How
So,
did you How did you get interested in this book particularly? If you don't, because it wasn't when you talked about this case, it wasn't one that jumped out on my radar. But when you
right,
talk about it, it is quite interesting. Because we'll get to that other two books in a moment. But I just, how did you
yeah.
what was your process in finding this story?
Well, in this particular case, I wanted to form a documentary company focused on Southwest stories. So, me and two other friends drew up a list of 20 different topics, and Smitty came to the top because this case kind of ruined the innocence of Tucson because this took place in the mid 60s. It was still kind of a backwater southwestern town. Um, think of the movie American Graffiti, and that's what Tucson was like at that time. And then all of a sudden, you've got this dark thing that happened where these three girls were killed. Some of the teens knew he did it, but stayed quiet because they didn't want to quote narc on their friend. And so, but then this lady who I did the book with, she met him a month before he was arrested. So they had, a couple of weeks of bliss, and then all of a sudden the cops show up. And so anyway, she maintained her relationship with him all the way to the end. She loved him
Wow.
no matter what. And so to me, that was fascinating too. She's still in love with the guy.
There's a love story in that. Wow.
Yeah, there it is. It's
Wow.
very strange, but
Yeah,
I didn't. I wanted to. I want to tackle subjects that I'm interested in, and hopefully they have a commercial appeal. So he had been written about before, but no one ever really solved the crime. So that was one thing, and because I'm in Arizona and I have access to these materials, it was easy for me to try to figure this story out. Second book is Jay Sebring, who you mentioned. Jay Sebring he was murdered by the Manson family trying to defend the life of Sharon Tate. But the book's real focus is on Jay Sebring because what happened was his legacy got drowned when he was killed by the Manson family. But he was the first person to bring men's hair design to the United States, and he was going to be Vidal Sassoon before Vidal Sassoon, but the murder kind of took all that away. But it starts with how he thought about how men's hair design, how he started pricing, how he's a true visionary, and so it was kind of like to figure out how he thought, the friendships that he built, the network that he built, and then he was going to bring hair products to the market. He was going to be the first, and then he's killed, and then his business is his name is dragged through the mud, and then the people that he was in business with took over his business and brokered up and went off and made their riches.
I think
So
that's also
it's a terrible,
incredibly
terrible,
worthwhile.
yeah.
Oh,
And then
sorry,
and then
Marshall.
on top of that, his family has had to deal with these Manson parole hearings for the last 50 years. So this is something that has lingered on in their lives. It's not just profound sadness. This is just something that is now brought up 2 to 3 times a year because they have to go to these parole hearings to keep these people from coming out of prison.
I was
Excuse
just
me.
going to say, and you kind of addressed it now when you were talking about what was happening with the trial and well, or the I guess the revisiting of it. That's really amazing to go back and kind of correct something that was maybe muddied or maybe wasn't and it wasn't in the correct light like, so many years later. So I think that's also very much just an interesting aspect of getting into it, like a correction that you wouldn't expect to take place and fascinating as you go. So
Well,
it just
this is a situation that I also did with a book on Elvis Presley and Colonel Parker. I had access to Colonel Parker's letters, discussing, all these things that everybody just assumed about Colonel Parker. So there's this narrative that everybody believes to be true, and then all of a sudden, like, it's actually untrue. And how do you teach people to rethink this situation? So, for example, with Elvis, he had to sell his catalog for $5 million in 1973 to pay off his divorce to Priscilla. Everybody seems to think that Colonel Parker, that was his idea. Well, it turns out that it wasn't his idea, and he actually told Elvis, "I think that that's your pension. You should never ever touch that." And Elvis wanted a quick fix and wanted to pay her off, and always thought, "Well, I'll just keep making money." Well, that was kind of 1972 was kind of the end of his hits run. Even though he was still famous, he wasn't he didn't have the hits after that. So it was a very, very short-sighted financial decision. But again, the point being, this was something that Colonel Parker discouraged, not encouraged. And the same thing with the Jay Sebring book. When people wrote about him being involved in orgies and satanic rituals, and these were things, and I was shocked that the media made this up because when I was part of the media in the late 90s through 2010, we didn't make up stuff. We no way. Well, we were too afraid that that first of all that's not in my DNA, and then secondly, yeah, we would have gotten in trouble for that. And so it was shocking to me that the media and Time Magazine was one of the ones that were guilty of this. They quoted people anonymously, and then the article was written anonymously. What we found out, which never happens. So, and they were saying that he was found in his underwear, and that Sharon Tate had a breast cut off. Well, the autopsy show that and there are autopsy photos where he's wearing pants when he was killed, and Sharon Tate never ever had her breast cut off. And so these stories just kind of circulated for years, and then all of a sudden the killers are caught, and everybody forgets about the victims, and now they're all
yeah.
focused on these crazy killers and writing stories about them, but they don't realize the damage that they did to the victims.
And I
So
guess
that's what
like
that book's about.
and time never corrected it, or there was no real correction. It just kind of went on and
Never did. Never did. So I always hate it when somebody like that or a news magazine will say, we are we are this and this is our name and this is what our brand stands for. And I'll go, you know what? I can think of 3 or 4 scandals that you guys were involved with.
with
So
with with Colonel Parker, I was going to ask you too. So I don't know if this is also true or not, right? Or I mean, obviously you know, but what I was reading about is that he was kind of on purpose taking kind of the bad stuff on himself, right? So Elvis
yes.
keeps the good image, and Colonel Parker, well, yeah, I'm okay being the bad guy because I
Yep.
guess maybe I mean financial benefit, obviously, but
I'm,
just
I'm
that's my
looking
job.
for my book on the back of the Colonel Parker book. It was
Yeah,
it
show
was
us the books if you have, Marshall. That's okay.
well, the thing is I give my books away all the time. I will show you one book. You talked about the Steve McQueen book. This is
that's
the McQueen book that you need. That's called Steve McQueen, Life and Legend of a Hollywood Icon. That was written in 2010. Much better than the one that you keep referencing.
You
Um,
well that so I mean that one really just caught my attention. It was a key point and all the things. I think it for my end it also shows why I think it gives you the longevity where you've done 30 plus books, like establishing I would say trust with people. That's part of it, verifying things, being really in balance. Like from my viewpoint, I just want to always say balanced. You're doing a third Steve McQueen book too, right? About Tom Horn, like the process of it as
yeah.
well, or
Well, that's a coffee table book, but that was And again, that's where the value of keeping your friendships over the years. So I always go back to the well. Now, of course, the well is dying off with McQueen people because now Tom Horn and the Hunter are 45 years away from us now. But sometimes you have to go back to the well and re-interview the people to see if there's any new nuance. And then, of course, with this book, it's a coffee table book on Tom Horn and the Hunter using Barbara McQueen's photos that we didn't use from the first book. And so I've always said to her, like, you've taken like 850 photos. We only used 150 for the first book. I said, we've got all these extra photos. I could do a book on Tom Horn and the Hunter. And she's like, oh, I'm tired of Steve. I'm tired of talking about him. You do the book and I'll write an introduction. So that's what we did.
That's a lot of trust there too, Marshall. That's
Yeah,
just
I
go
didn't think
ahead.
about that, but you're right. And hear her words were, I feel like you're kicking a dead horse. And I said, well, you know what though? I said, if we're not writing about Steve, no one else is. I said, the last book that was written on Steve was me, which was 5 years ago. So anyway, that's a coffee table book, and it's about the making of those two films, and you'll really like it because there's stuff that I've uncovered that have never been revealed before. And and then you go into the making of the film and what started it and how hard it was, um, and so it's just a nice coffee table book. So. And again, the way that it unfolded was that these three books landed in 2005 or
Just wanted to
2025.
make
Sorry.
I just wanted to make sure too, Marshall, because you mentioned three books. Was the third book the Elvis book, or was there one more book as well
No, it was
in terms of that?
Smitty, Sebring, and McQueen. And I also have another one that's in the can. It's about a recording studio in Georgia. I'm friends with the guys in Collective Soul, the rock group. And actually they're big in Canada. Um, and one of the bassist of the group, Will Turpin, his father owned a recording studio where they got their start. But it was this little small recording studio that has stood the test of time and is now the longest running recording studio in Georgia history. So it's this cute little book about Bill Turpin, his father, who by any means necessary through technology and changes. At one point in time, it was a recording studio still, but it switched to video production, and he just had to roll with the changes and keep that studio going as long as he could. And it's still running today, and so that's going to be another coffee table book, but that's going to be 2026.
Colin, go ahead.
Okay. I see him here. Oh, they got.
Yeah,
Yeah,
because
February 4th, they're playing Venetian Theater.
You got to go see him. What city are you in? Oh, are you in
we're in
I,
different ones. Yeah, so
yeah,
we're so
Toronto, right?
yeah, well,
I'm in Oshawa
yeah.
and Martinton.
Well, Toronto's not too far, right? So
Yeah,
we're probably 80 clicks, depends on the traffic, like everywhere these days. But
yeah,
it's I mean, I mean, I'll give it the nice part of it, I guess, in terms of technology and the connection. So it's always nice to see people in person. Like it makes such a difference, I find, especially when I go to community events. But I mean, this is really a nice treat that, we can be in the different places. On my end and Collins for sure, right? Being able to be in two different cities and then still connect with someone in the
Yeah.
third city for a podcast. So I'll give it that as a benefit. But yeah, there's a lot to be said, maybe much more expensive because otherwise, we probably would have bugged you. Can we take you out for a coffee somewhere in your neighborhood? But a lot more expensive, would have been an expensive coffee. So yeah.
A
Do you
So
funny
ever
thing
come
about
to
funny
Canada or
Uh,
Toronto?
I've been to Canada twice. Let's see. I went to Vancouver, which I thought was just a beautiful city.
Yeah.
And then I went to Detroit, and then I crossed over. What's that city? It's like a
Windsor,
Victoria?
Windsor. Yeah,
Windsor. Yeah.
went to
Oh, okay.
Windsor.
That's
Yeah,
border. Yeah.
yeah. But I have a good buddy from Calgary who's here actually now, and he keeps begging me to go to Calgary.
Well,
Yeah, and
there's
visit him
Beautiful,
there.
beautiful.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well,
Go
there's so
to
many things
Banff.
to see on both ends. Yeah, like in Canada, the US. I used to do a driving tour back in the day too. So I remember, back before the GPS with the road maps, and I had family going from basically from Toronto, and they were in Winnipeg. So driving through the US, hitting four different states, and just the conversations along the way are really fascinating because you would talk to people, and stop at a rest stop at a restaurant, and you just get a different feeling for every different area. So yeah, getting
Yeah.
out is,
I've always wanted to go to Toronto, but the one I really want to go to is Quebec because I understand the it's just beautiful and the French influences and looks like a slice of Europe.
Well,
Yes.
Montreal, very much so, like the old Montreal, like very
Yes.
much that's what I get a lot of people who have visited Europe. Just that's exactly what they say. You've nailed it.
Yeah.
But yeah, definitely come to Canada, Marshall. It'll be great. Would love
Well,
to
you
see
guys
you.
arrange it through the
Maybe
college. I'll be happy to come.
no, I would love that. Such a pleasure of mine. I mean, I just Kelvin will probably have a few more questions, but I just want to make sure I express enough. Like you were so generous to do this for us, and for me, really, like that. I read quite a lot when I can now. As we were talking about it kind of casually before the podcast on a phone call, where you know on my end, there's a lot of research books that obviously I read for the research that I'm doing. So finding that moment like to read your books, like I want to make sure I have a perfect slice of time to really get into it. But it's interesting that there are a few books that really resonate with me, and that book really, really resonated. And again,
Well, thank
balance.
you.
And but I think that's a huge lesson. Like, so I appreciate it
Yeah.
for sharing people. Like to me, like the trust aspect, developing it, checking your sources, maybe, right? So for younger journalists, for younger writers. So
Yeah. Well,
much
read
appreciation.
the Sebring book. I think that will resonate with you as well
No, I
because
appreciate that.
you'll see that you'll be rooting for this young man out of Detroit, who starts doesn't know what he wants to do in life, goes into the Navy, starts cutting people hair, realizes there's a market for men's hair, and then totally revolutionizes the industry. The industry today is now $100 billion industry, and nobody knows who to credit that to. Well, it's Jay Sebring.
Yeah, no, that's incredible, and it's not something because I've seen you talk about this on another interview on that I've seen, right, in terms of the hair, starting the hairstyling and or hair cutting. But it's fascinating because I mean that's not something that resonates in those news clips that we get or in terms of general knowledge. So
Right.
fascinating that angle itself.
Yeah.
And Colin, I feel like I know I'm kind of on this podcast much more so than usually. Hopefully, I'm monopolizing because I just want to ask all these questions to Marcia. It's such a
Hey,
thrill,
you can
right?
have me
No,
on a
it's all
second
good.
time.
Yeah, that'd
Definitely,
be awesome.
definitely.
But I know I normally we kind of have more of a beat, but I'm always like, oh, I got one more question for Marcia. I've got one more. So
All
Colin, I'll
good.
pass it over to you
No, no, no,
to
I'm good.
continue.
I mean, I'm enjoying listening as well to some of the narratives, and you're asking some very, very good questions, Martin. Um, I, I, um, I am just as I listen to the conversation between both of you guys, and I'm listening to some of the profiles of the books. I'm very eager to dig into some of these books, right, and learn from them as well. Um, so with the topic of resilience and perseverance, I think it's really, really, really important nowadays for younger people, especially, to really understand what that means. So I think a lot of the messages that you have to share, Marshall, will be very, very important to folks. Are you writing your own autobiography by any chance at
No,
all?
no,
No?
I don't know. Uh,
Yeah.
I just don't know if people would read that or not.
Yeah.
Every now and then I might post something about a memory I have, but what I don't
Yeah.
want to do is betray the people that I have written about, but I could do it
Mhm.
anonymously, what they used to call like a blind item. Yeah. Like for
Yeah.
example, I heard something about a buddy of mine told me about a major movie star who threw a major tantrum and fit because he didn't have enough berries like in his cereal before the shoot or something. And I don't know why.
Oh man,
It just
diva
struck me as
syndrome.
so it struck me as so funny.
Not a
And
lot
this
of
was like,
resilience in that. Yeah.
No.
yeah, this is a beloved figure, and
Wow.
you hear about somebody like that throwing a temper tantrum over berries in their cereal, you know. But
Wow.
you hear stuff like that all the time, and but that stuff would kind of label you as a gossip monger. So I try
Mhm.
to, but sometimes I'll put some of those things in the book if it's a fair point. Like with Steve
Yeah.
McQueen. I mean, he had multiple affairs. And
Yeah.
people might say, well, that doesn't really belong. Well, it belonged because it wreaked havoc in his personal relationships.
Yeah.
Well, no, you see the whole person. So I mean, I very much reading the book. I thought some of these, some of the things were incredible. Like, I realized the stuff that he was overcoming with hearing impairments. I think grade nine education, a couple other things he was facing and moving around. I think a lot in the beginning too, right? I believe stepfathers, that type of thing, right? And then he persevered through that. But then it gives you a fuller picture. So it's, we're not all perfect. So then you've got the other part of
Right.
it. I don't have to relate to this. And I kind of had a feeling you would say no to that, a biography in general, because I think that's the hardest part with being objective, right? It's a little bit easier to when you're studying and talking to people being objective, everybody else. I think like if I had to do that or anyone else, you start questioning yourself, how can I be objective to myself? Like you want to be self-analytical, but it's a little tougher, right? And
Yeah, and I want to be the fly on the wall. I don't want to be the focus of the attention. Even as a reporter, you're always taught don't make yourself don't get involved in the story.
Yeah.
So sometimes I saw other journalists become activists, and then they'd stand up at City Hall and start saying something to the city council, and it's like, wow, you just stepped in it, pal. You've lost your objectivity, and you
Yeah.
you you can no longer be reporting on this issue.
Everything afterwards becomes perceived as biased, right? After
Right.
that.
Exactly.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Very good point. Yeah. No, no, no. Great to meet you, Marshall. I look forward
Thank you.
to many other opportunities as well to dig a little bit deeper. But no, this has been a very good experience to learn some lessons from you as well and some insights
Well, thank you
from
very
my
much. I
perspective.
appreciate it. Yeah, and if
Thank
you
you so
again, you
much,
want to have
Marshall.
me on another time, we want to
Oh,
talk about one subject or another subject, we can do
you,
it.
you know what, Marshall? Maybe if you like, we don't have to like down the line. Let me know what subject might interest you, and if we can fit into kind of my general scope that Cole and I do in terms of like we like the idea of being able. For me, it's always connecting generations, trying not to be a know-it-all, but trying to help people kind of okay, you learn the wisdom from this part, and then the younger generation can also teach the older generation this, kind of meet in the middle. Maybe something along those lines or whatever percolates, because sometimes now we'll get like a light bulb idea. But you don't have to ask me twice. I mean, Colin knows like I was thrilled to have you here. So like that's a super easy one for me. Like I'm not gonna say no, no, Marsha, I don't want to see you. I'll be like, you
Yeah.
want to do a podcast tomorrow? I'm
Mhm.
there. But
Yeah.
and
Well, the
but
one thing you it's great that you mentioned it. The one thing I see in younger people today is they want to connect with like a grandfatherly or grandmotherly type. It seems like those types of relationships are dissipating. I'll give you an example. My mother went back to college when she was 79 years old to get her bachelor's, and then she went on to become and get her master's. But everybody in that classroom gravitated to her. They
Yeah.
gravitated to her wisdom, and like then she would enter the lunchroom, and her nickname was Granny. And so she'd enter the lunchroom, everybody would be chanting, "Granny,
I love
Granny,
that.
Granny." And then some of them she has maintained some of those friendships, but I see that there's that yearning for that connection to that old
Yeah.
school generation. It's like, well, where is that? What's happening?
Well, we
Yeah.
do like that's a passion of mine, right? Connecting students and seniors. And what I find very often, I have parents of students come later, especially if students located to another city. Because you talked about, let's say, you're lucky in a way where you've been in a certain spot for a while. You've got your roots in there. You've got the connections. Probably people who can help you or just have a chat. But when the students, let's say, move for school, there's such a disconnect. And I had even parents come to me and say, let's say if you connect with the senior they were having these much more open discussions with a senior who wasn't maybe as judgmental as the family. They were able to say, "Hey, you know what? Here's, I'm your friend, but not like a family member. I can give you an objective viewpoint. I can help you out." And there isn't that, and that student doesn't fear maybe the judgment or obviously the parent child kind of structure. So you've really yeah that's a passion of mine. So we could do that as a topic
Hmm.
down the line to
Well, and
another
I
one.
just want you to
I
know something. Arizona State University has built there was on this corner they tried to get it zoned for a lot of things. A lot of things didn't pass. They finally decided that they would build a retirement community, but with only ASU. It was ASU oriented. So all these folks either were former professors or former graduates, and now they're in retirement, and it's part of the campus, and they can go to classes anytime they want. And there's all sorts of calling for volunteerism. And so they're able to connect. They want that connection to the university still, and they're active retired people. And so it's this great experiment that's going on that seems to be working very well. They can, they've got their thing going. And I've interviewed them because I took my mom there to see if she wanted to stay there, and she loved it. And they were so active. I said, "How busy are you?" He goes, "Marshall, we're doing something every single day, and we've got to just take a break on Fridays and Saturdays just for us because we're always doing something with the university." So that to me, like that's just again one of those insider things where I'm seeing intergenerational connection. And one of the ladies there, we did a video on this. I have to send it to you. She goes to a bench in the university and she just starts talking to young people. And every day these people come to this bench, and so she's giving the advice that you talked about, where it's non-judgmental, and
Yeah.
it's the most beautiful thing that you ever want to see.
We
So
we plug it a lot here too because I wasn't going to say it particularly because it goes up. We have a website as well. There's a group I get involved with in Grassroots, the Seniors Housing Alliance. So people check that out. But just talks a lot about like I do intergenerational research. Again, those connections. So same thing. Send me the link for because I find it fascinating about what I'm going to call I guess the academic adjacent building maybe or and so I'd love to learn more about it. And if people are interested in the other part because finding those solutions and then you also I don't want to miss the beat that you mentioned. I find that the people who are really kind of doing the volunteer stuff now, they really tend to get overwhelmed. There's such a need for it, so it's more of a question of sometimes other people want to help but they're not sure like where do I plug in. So whether it's maybe more academians from other places finding this building or building something similar, or like as I said, I plugged their website. If people want to see, okay, these are all the different things they're doing, and especially in your specific communities, it really helps out. Because I hate seeing volunteer burnout as well, right? If they're really just they don't want to give up, they want to help, 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 and then the wall hits, right?
yeah,
So yeah, but I
Those are
definitely want to
two
hear about
good.
that building.
yeah.
Yeah. And those are two good conversations for the future as well, Martin. The future of education, and then the fine line between volunteering and being taken advantage of. Those are
It's
Well, I would
very
think that older
relevant.
people would not have a problem saying enough.
Yeah, yeah, the older people, but I mean the students who are looking to get noticed and experience and
Yeah,
network themselves. When they put themselves out there in a volunteer position, are they truly getting back what they deserve, or you know what I mean? So these are things that maybe we definitely want to unpack later on as well, because there's a lot to be said around. There's a lot of enough of a paradigm shift in both of these areas that probably need to be explored, right? And brainstorm together. So
yeah.
definitely
definitely the future
burnout.
of education. Yeah.
Yeah, no, definitely watching for volunteer burnout. When we had the pandemic shutdown, when I was talking to volunteer groups, I was actually telling a few of them, let's say they had expectations of volunteers putting in 10 hours a week for whatever reason, and telling them, you know what, maybe see if you can get a few more volunteers, back it down a bit to 7, because people who really want to help, they literally do. I've seen it. They keep going, keep going. They don't want to say no to helping, and then they hit that wall and then they disappear for a little bit recovering. So rather it's that nice and steady. So it may be something I don't know if you're seeing on your end or whatever the case is, but yeah, lots of discussions.
Yeah.
But I would say, Marshall, it was such a pleasure. I think if anything, just pick a topic that interests you. We'll chat it out down the line, and we'll do one.
Okay. Well, thank you, gentlemen. It was nice
I'm
nice to
good.
meet you.